you boos and ghouls out there in YouTube land. This is Jen. And just like last week and the week before, we're heading back to that Crawley Crypt. In episode 3, Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone. And just like last week's episode and all through the house, his big problem was Benadryl. Basic math is going to be the Achilles heel for this poor character in tonight's episode. So if you guys want to hear my thoughts on Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone, well then, stick around.
The cat came back, they thought he was a goner, but the cat came back, he just couldn't stay away.
The hits just keep coming with this show. You're not gonna hear hardly any cons. You might hear one or two little nitpicks, but this is another fabulous episode from our good old pal, the Crypt Keeper. This is one that I hear a lot of people put in their top 10 list with very good reason. And the biggest reason I think people really dig this particular episode is the black humor. This is the one, the first episode did have a little bit of humor, but it was played very seriously. All through the house, there was a wink and a nod, but in this particular episode, Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone, I think it's just blatant. It is a black comedy just as much as it is a horror, which is no surprise if you look behind who's in the director's chair for this week's episode. Just like last week's episode, it's another producer, an executive producer of the show. This time, we're going to Richard Donovan. And for you kids who might know, it depends on what flavor of kid you are. If you're an 80s kid, the movie you're going to go to him is The Goonies. But we're also hitting up in the holiday season, and I would say that another big claim to fame with this particular director, he directed a holiday classic, at least in my humble opinion, and that would be Scrooged. And he also did the Lethal Weapon movies. I believe he did the Superman movies. He did a bizarre movie with Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason called The Toy, which is not a horror movie, but is a movie that should be looked into. Speaking of horror, you guys are thinking, okay, so he's done a lot of action, comedy, buddy cop stuff, fantasy stuff. Where's his horror credentials, Jen? Well, I'm sure all of you horror addicts already know where I'm going with this, but if you want to look in his biggest claim to fame in the horror department, it would be one of my personal favorite movies, The Omen. And get ready for a hot take, kids. I actually prefer The Omen for, demonic evil children over The Exorcist. Now, before you get your pitches and are gonna tar and feather me, guys.
Oh, I've heard enough. Burner!
Okay, I don't love The Exorcist, but I do have immense respect for it, and I can understand why so many horror fans do love The Exorcist. But for me, if we're gonna go for an evil kid, with Satan playing a role in the kid's life, I definitely would say that The Omen is where I am at with that particular opinion. It's a hot take, but you'll always get honesty on this channel. This director has kind of done it all, and he's done a lot of it very well. I can't say if The Toy is necessarily done well, but it's an interesting film, like I said. Also in this episode, not only do we have behind the camera, but we have immense talent in front of the camera. We have Joey Tone. I'm probably totally butchering his name, but he's been a hard-working actor, and again, maybe you don't know his name, but you definitely know his face and his body of work. I knew him all the way from the 80s. I think the first thing I ever saw him in was he played, not necessarily the villain, but definitely a sinister character in Eddie and the Cruisers. And I remember as a little kid watching, and I didn't know who he was, but I remember thinking, I really like that guy. He also played Richie Valens' manager in La Bamba, and he played a really nice guy. I think the thing about this particular actor is how versatile he is. Now, I guess his biggest claim to fame, particularly if you're a mob lover, was he played Ralphie in The Sopranos. A character so legendary that even other mafiosos like look at him and think to themselves, that guy is a piece of shit, which, you know, you kind of have to be a really particular piece of shit if you're going to have mafiosos judge you. And his character is legendary, but as much as he was a loathsome character, he was a character you couldn't take your eyes off of, and he was just riveting on the screen. And for you action guys, he was in all the Bad Boys movies as well. He played the captain in those movies, and he had some of the great humor in those movies. He worked really well with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. He was part of why those movies are so magic. And he is great in this particular episode. And much like our first episode, this is an episode where our main character breaks the fourth wall a lot. Not quite as much as the first episode, but we are getting the story from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Only this horse happens to be in a coffin when he's telling the story, which is another thing I love about this particular episode, is it's set in a carnival setting, and we're touching on life and death matters. We're literally, the guy's name, his stage name in this carnival is Resurrection. But before he became Resurrection, he was just a down on his luck homeless person with a serious drinking problem. And one night, a mad scientist who, you know, and it tells from the Crypt, you need a good mad scientist, wakes him from a boozed-induced sleep and says, I'll give you, and it's a German, and Tales from the Crypt loves having mad German scientists in their episodes. This will not be the last episode where we will see a mad German scientist in one of these Tales from the Crypts. But he shows, he wakes him from a booze-induced sleep, and he shows him, I will give you all this money if you just come with me and just do a little procedure. And what the procedure is he takes a house cat, and apparently there is something in a cat's brain or in his gland that will give you 9 lives. And of course, Joey thinks that this is all a bunch of bullshit, but you know, the money intrigues him and motivates him, and so he decides to go under the knife and let the doc implant the cat gland into his brain. Unfortunately for our poor bum alcoholic, the only way to find out if it actually works is the doc shoots him point blank in the head. It's a very cool shot. That's another thing about this episode that I really like. There are some really cool technical shots in this where you see him, you know, you see the doctor shoot him, and then you see him go, no, 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 and he's dead for a second, and then when he wakes up, he's screaming at the doc not to shoot him, and he goes, you're dead, you're dead. And so it really worked. And what would people do, guys? Like, you would think if you had 9 lives, would you try to do some good in the world and maybe try to right some justices? Or if you see someone, you know, in the brink of life or death, you might put out your hand and stick out your neck. No, that's not what they do. Instead, they decide they want to turn a quick buck. So they turn to this carnival show. And like I said, I love this particular setting. And in the opening scene of this, you see people at an old-style carnival that you will not see these days. You even see a half-man, half-woman dressed like they used to in the days, and it's just such an iconic shot. And you see people, you know, watching kind of just curiosities and what they would call back in the day freak shows. And this is where Robert Wool enters, who is a carnival barker, and he's looking for a new act, and the doc, our mad German scientist, goes to Robert Wool, who also is no stranger to HBO. Later, much later in down the line, he will be in an HBO series called Arliss. And Robert Wool, everybody talks about Joey Pantoliano's performance in this particular episode, and he is great, but I think people underlook Robert Wool as this carnival barker. He brings just as much humor as anybody else, and he he's very trepidatious about this particular offer, but he's kind of, his back's against the wall, so he tells the doc, I'll give you a chance. And so they set up the first performance, and the first thing they do is have him sit in a big tank full of water, and they're going to drown him, and they're going to drown him. 3 minutes will usually kill a man, but they're going to let him drown for an hour. And before the tank fills up, we see this supposedly, I guess, showgirl come up and say, tap on the glass, and she has this very breathy kind of baby doll voice, and she's like, would you like to have dinner later? Dinner, and she's just tapping on the glass. It's an interesting way to introduce yourself right before the person you want to go out on a date with is about to kill themselves. And she writes it on lipstick, and it's just a very, very cute. And Robert Wool is doing his thing, you know, trying to excite the crowd, and the crowd's not, that's another thing I love about this episode, like the crowd does not like have that much expectations for this particular sideshow act, and Robert Wool is trying to do his best, and he's like, I beg you all, please fight your emotions. Do not do anything to stop this. And it's very much showmanship. And like the crowd's just sitting there. You see one guy kind of just half-heartedly eating some probably very stale popcorn. Nobody's that impressed. And they go and fill up the tank, and they kill him. And it's really cute because they have to wait an hour before they drain the tank and see if resurrection is going to live up to his name. See, it's a very tongue-in-cheek scene where you see our mad German scientist holding up the stethoscope with water coming out of the ears going, he's dead. And you see Robert Wool just leaning back in a chair looking at a girly magazine, and he goes, thank you so much, doctor. And he goes, don't go away yet, folks, because Ulrich only lives to die again. And they drain the tank. And again, really funny because you see the body just sinking, and he's not resurrecting. And Robert Wool looks over at our mad German scientist and goes, Doc, I think we can get in trouble for some states in this. And all the crowd's just walking away, not even particularly upset that, you know, a human has just died. They're just like, he didn't resurrect, and they're walking out on the show. And Robert Wool is trying to get the audience back. And the Carly, the showgirl who wants to have a date with Ulrich, is going, resurrection! And stamping her feet, and then she hits our mad German scientist and says, this is your fault. And that's when Ulrich miraculously pops up and goes, it's his fault that I'm rich. And then you see Robert Wool go, resurrection! And there's just so much energy, and it is such a fun scene, and it's also very funny. And even though this, like all tells from the Crypt episodes, play very fast and loose in the logic of it, the thing I find interesting is we do touch on some social commentary. There was a hotly debated thing about, you know, death penalty and also just death and entertainment. And in the 80s and 90s, a lot of, hell, there's people probably still now who would think, you know, put these kind of things on pay-per-view and people will pay. And that's kind of what this show is showing. People will pay to watch someone die. It's just a human curiosity, and a lot of people can be very callous and not look at it as human beings suffering, but just an entertainment for entertainment value. And again, this show isn't trying to make some grand statement, but they are kind of pointing the finger at the audience just a little bit, and you know, we're watching this for entertainment. And of course, a news spreads, and he has so many shows. But remember, cats only have 9 lives, and the doc, our mad German scientist, says we can only book so many shows, and they just keep getting more and more elaborate. So for Ulrich's next performance, we start getting very theatrical. When they drowned him in the container of water. Ulrich wasn't very much into showmanship. Robert Wool was into showmanship, but Ulrich was still kind of wet behind the ears. But for this new particular one, they dress it up like the old Western frontier justice, and Robert Wool's like, gather round, see what happens when you do the dastardly down in dastardly. And he's got like, you know, straw coming out, and it's just very cute. And Ulrich's dressed out in kind of a cowboy with fringe, and he's going, howdy partners, and just really leaning into the Southern Texas draw. And his girlfriend Carly is there, and he's like, pull the lever, Carly, pull the lever. And she's like, I don't want to do it. And he finally ends up pulling the lever himself. And so Ulrich the Undying gets hung, and he eventually resurrects and comes back to life. And I think it's very cute that his girlfriend doesn't want to pull the lever. And we get a few more montages of Ulrich dying. One of my favorites is probably the one where they have him go behind a bear thing and do kind of a shooting gallery, and people pay $1,000 for a shot. And again, it's very much commentary, because Robert Wool tells somebody, oh yes, we do take personal checks, but I'll need 2 pieces of ID. And what's really funny is we get a father and son team, and you see this kid going, Dad, I don't want to do it. And Robert Wool says under his breath, oh, shut up, you little fat fuck. And he's like, listen to your father, son, listen to your father. And the kid misses his shot, and his dad is super pissed. He's like, you did that on purpose, Junior. And it's just super, super funny. And we get another one who finally does take the shot. He's actually an archery champion, and he goes, what do I get? And Carly and Robert Wool pull out the arrow sticking out from his heart and give it to him. And the guy's just like all impressed and holding it up for the crowd, and the crowd is cheering. Again, we're touching on, you know, we're going back to kind of the gladiators and that bloodlust that I guess is in all of us. We like to think of ourselves as these rational, you know, human beings with compassion for our fellow man. And I'm sure we all have that to some point, but it's not too buried under the surface. We also have this bloodlust of wanting to see people die in interesting ways. And it doesn't matter if it's in Roman times, back in the 80s, or now. Death is something that's always going to bring a crowd, and people who will be, you know, there will be some people who will be speaking eloquently and, you know, trying to stop bloodlust, but the majority of people are going to be sitting there going, yay, and screaming and clapping and eating popcorn and looking at it as entertainment rather than a human life being taken and snuffed out. It's interesting. Again, this show isn't trying to go too deep in commentary, but the camera is being pointed back at the audience, which I think is very cool. And another really cool death scene is an electrocution, and they do a drawing, and it's a little old lady, and a real grandma looking woman, and you would think she would be a shrinking violet, and he goes, are you ready? Robert Wool does, and she goes, you bet your ass I'm ready. And then it's really, really funny. But poor Ulrich has a bit of a problem, because he's used up an extra life of his, because before he does the electrocution one, he uses up one of his lives because he decides that our crazy German doctor is taking too much of a cut for his research, and he wants all the profits for himself. So on a stormy, rainy night, he gets the doc to go take a car ride with him, and they get into a horrific accident. And like, no one suspects Ulrich because he dies too, but unfortunately for the doctor, Ulrich can come back, but the doc can't. And so Ulrich takes the whole profits for himself. And when he's doing the electrocution scene, it's very, very phony, but in the best way possible. Like Robert Wool asks him if he has anything to say, and he's like, yes, I'd like to dedicate this to my friend, doctor who would want me to die and go on dying. And he's doing a very hokey, hammy performance. He's shedding crocodile tears. And the crowd, again, with the bloodlust, is like, shut up and cook him! Someone shouts that out. Also, for a fun fact for you guys, look in the crowds, because our director, Richard Donovan, will be in the crowd, and he will be one of the audience members chanting, "All Rick, all Rick." And sitting beside him is his real life wife as well. And I just thought that was cute. I love it when directors pull a Hitchcock and make a little cameo in their movies, whether it's a big, I actually prefer it when they're small and you really have to train your eye to find it. And I thought that was a very cool thing about this particular episode. But Ulrich's okay. Like, he wasted one of his lives with killing the good doctor, but he's still okay. He still can do a couple of performances. Unfortunately for him, Carly's getting a little bit greedy, and she decides that she wants the cut of his money. And so one night when they're in their trailer, before she sees, "I want to see Mr. Friendly," she decides that she's going to kill him. And they're sitting there talking, and he's like, "Oh baby, this dying thing is taking years off my life," which is a really cute line. And he also says, "Did I tell you, Polanski wants to film all my lives, all 9 of them," which is a really cute little bit too. And she goes, "Oh really?" And then she takes a knife out of her bag and stabs him. And again, this episode is chock full of humor, because after she stabs him, you see her praying, and then she immediately starts gathering up all the money, and she says, "I'm sorry," and she runs out. It's a really cool. And so Ulrich has lost 2 of his valuable lives. And remember when I said at the beginning of this episode, it's basic math that's going to undo Ulrich, because he doesn't factor in a couple of his deaths, and he only has 1 death left, and he decides that this is the death that's going to pay him big. He tells Robert Wool that he wants to take all of the profits from him, and they won't have anyone, their performer. He'll walk. And so Robert Wool, with his back against the wall, reluctantly agrees, and that's where they are burying him alive, and he's telling the story to the audience. And then he starts running back through all the deaths he's lived, and boom, boom, boom. And again, even though this isn't a very heavy horror episode, you see how he's dying and how he's doing math. And then all of a sudden, he tells himself, "Oh, it's too bad that poor kitty had to die. Poor dead kitty." And then you can just see that a dim little flicker, the light bulb is starting to warm up, and he's doing some quick basic math, and he realizes that this is his last life and that they've already buried him. And there is a great shot. The closing shot is you hear Ulrich screaming inside a coffin, which, if you're claustrophobic like I am, it's a fucking creepy scene. And you hear him pounding out, and he's like, "Somebody help me, somebody help me." And then you see a cat. The crowds have gone home. The people that have buried him are walking away, and they go, "Did you hear anything?" And they go, "It must have been a cat." And you hear a cat going, "Meow!" And it ends on kind of an eerie episode, but very much a Tales from the Crypt episode. Usually the evil doing usually gets their upcomings. There's a few that get away with it, but generally speaking, most of them do get their upcomings, and Ulrich is no exception to that rule. This episode is just so much fun, and I really think the injection of humor really makes this episode work. That and the wonderful performances and our great carnival setting. If I do have any cons, this is the most minorness of nitpicks, and it's only because I wish they would have played around with an idea. They do introduce in this episode the concept of sometimes it takes Ulrich longer to come back from a death than others. Some resurrections take longer than others, and I would have liked for them to play around with that idea about maybe giving an explanation as to why it works that way, because sometimes he comes back back really fast. And sometimes there's a really funny scene where they're about to embalm him and Carly has to run and go, he's not really dead. And of course our coroner says if he's dead, he could have fooled, if he's not dead, he could have fooled me. And then Ulrich pops up and the coroner has a heart attack as Ulrich comes back to life. Which is, it's cliche, we've seen it done before, but it's a really cute little moment. It works in this episode. But like I said, if there's any cons, I wish they could have played around and maybe given a reason as to why some resurrections work a little quicker and others don't. That was just kind of a fascinating thing if you're into kind of, I'm always into, I like to hear stories about people who have been clinically dead for a while and then they come back. I always am fascinated by that, so it's probably just a me thing. But other than that, I have no cons about this episode. I think it's fast, it's fun. Richard Donovan was definitely the right person to direct this one, and it's just a really fucking big blast. I absolutely love this episode, and I am going to give it another A-, and I would love to hear in the comments what you guys have to say about it. I think that is all I have to say about Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone. Please join me next week where we jump from death to beauty and what a woman will do to keep it at any cost in the episode Only Sin Deep. It's a really great one, and I hope you guys join me. And now I'll say what I always say, guys. I love you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And remember to always keep watching and talking horror. And I will be back in the next one very soon. I love you guys, and thank you again. Bye.